Symbols are bundles of meaning. The cross is the greatest of Christian symbols. The Roman Emperor Constantine envisioned a cross by which he could conquer, and he made Christianity official. Missionaries like Boniface took the Christian religion north of the Alps. The Emperor Charlemagne imposed the cross with the sword of his authority on the whole populace. Men clad in iron mail, fighting in the name of the cross, were called crusaders. The cross and the sword were joined, as in Switzerland, where Christians carried the cross against Christians. The greatest of the reformers, Martin Luther, successfully defied the power of the emperor of his day. But ironically, the bold stand Luther took on the Scriptures was under the protection of the sword of the German nobles. There was reform, too, in the Swiss town of Zurich, where the great church tower bore another statue of Charlemagne. Sermons by Reform leader Ulrich Zwingli, preached directly from Christ's Sermon on the Mount, woke young Conrad Grebel to believe that Christians are to love their enemies. Just then, the farmers of Germany were protesting the oppression of their rich lords and frightening authorities by picking up their homemade weapons. Conrad Grebel agreed with the outcry for freedom and justice, but he wrote a letter stating, "With Christians all killing has been put away." He sent that letter, stamped with the Grebel family seal, to a revolutionary leader. For baptizing people with such beliefs, Conrad's friend Felix Manz was drowned in Zurich. In 2004, a symbolic plaque recalling Manz's sacrifice was placed at the spot of his drowning. Reformer Zwingli was killed in a war he promoted against Catholics. His memorial shows him clutching both a Bible and a sword. An opposite teaching was published by Anabaptists at nearby Schleitheim. Christians were to use no violence. The author of that confession, Michael Sattler, is remembered by this stone on the site of his execution by fire. Northward in Holland, a country priest, Menno Simons, was also reading the New Testament for the first time. He too responded sympathetically when people protested violently against a corrupted Christianity. But, pointing to the clear words of Jesus, he wrote that Christians are a people of God's peace, a new creation. Christ, the Prince of Peace, is our defense. Christ will never leave us. A young Dutch minister named Tieleman van Bracht put out a book about Mennonites killed for their nonviolent faith. The title page has a symbol framing the slogan "Work and Hope" with a double wreath of peace and victory. The huge volume has the story of a pair left to her son by a mother who was burned for her faith. No one ever ate that precious symbol of faith. The Martyr book's most powerful illustration was that of the Dutch Dirk Willems, saving the policeman who had been chasing him from drowning. Dirk, who was then burned to death, had given his life for his enemy. That symbol, like an icon, is alive among Mennonites today. Across the Atlantic, in 1682, a Quaker businessman promised a holy experiment of peace. In memory, William Penn is called a friend of the native people he met here. While taking over their land, he met them with symbolic gifts. A symbol for Mennonites of Pennsylvania is the ship Concord that brought the first of their people here in the fall of 1683. Within a few years, when war loomed, They published their own translation of the Martyr Book, the biggest volume to have appeared so far in America. They hoped to include the pictures, but couldn't afford them. And sure enough, before long their neighbors fought to overthrow the English king. The Mennonites declared that they wanted to be helpful in anything that would preserve human life, but could not help in anything by which people were hurt. A battle raged right around the Germantown Mennonite meeting house. New symbols now celebrated the new American nation, even in local Fraktur art. The powerful eagle, clutching both the arrows of war and the olive branch of peace, had become the symbol of American identity. An opposite teaching symbol appeared in a drawing entitled "Two Enemies Making Peace at a Rosebush." From a Quaker sign painter came many versions of the peaceable kingdom from the prophecies of Isaiah. A Mennonite symbol of that vision showed swords and spears being beaten into plowshares in front of the Germantown meeting house. Shortly before World War I began, a student at the Hilltown High School drew an unusual symbol of peace: the American eagle with the olive branch, but without the arrows. Who was this student? He was Clayton Kratz, member of the Blooming Glen congregation and a senior at Goshen College. He answered the call to bring food to starving Mennonites in Russia. When Clayton left, he was engaged to marry fellow student Edie Miller of Maryland. He sent her a chest from Russia, a symbol of his love. He himself, executed on the false charge of spying, never returned. Our symbol of Clayton's witness for Christ's peace is a stone in the Blooming Glen Cemetery. That he may depend on you. In World War II, camps were set up for conscientious objectors. Many young Mennonite draftees from eastern Pennsylvania lived there during the war years. Included were such as Merrill Swartley of the Souderton congregation, Sam Durstein, future deacon at Salford, and John Schlosser of Toamenson, who died young after having participated in disease testing during his days at camp. Declining to take the sword, they were allowed forestry or other non-military work of national importance. The campers came from New England to California, and from a variety of backgrounds other than Mennonite brethren and brethren in Christ. Like the Mennonites of Revolutionary War times, they wanted work that helped rather than hurt their fellow human beings. But when not all their forestry tasks seemed meaningful, before the war was over, many volunteered for service in understaffed mental institutions. Their story inspired Pastor Warren Wenger, who heard it mentioned in the commencement address to his fellow graduates from technical school.
The speaker on that occasion was the president of the New Jersey Department of Institution and Agencies. And he gave a historical review of the treatment of mental patients in the state hospitals, including the changes that were brought about by the introduction of many medications, what we now know as psychotropic drugs. And then he said, but perhaps the biggest difference of all was brought about by the Mennonite plowboys who came into our institution knowing nothing about mental illness and just treated our patients with love and respect. And he said that opened our eyes to what those two things contributed. And he said he felt it did more for the mental patient than what the medicines did.
At the end of World War II, the Mennonite Central Committee called Jacob and Mildred Clemens of the Plains congregation to relief work in Ethiopia. Sarah Rush of the Deep Run congregation went as a nurse. Amidst sights and customs of a different culture, new friendships were begun. Within a decade, an Ethiopian church would be founded that would grow far beyond the membership of the Mennonite conferences that had supplied the original relief workers. From the Blooming Glen congregation came David and Maxine Durstein, who answered the call of the MCC for relief work in Europe. In a military cemetery in Belgium, they found the grave of soldier Walter Moyer, who had grown up at Blooming Glen. Destruction from the fierce Battle of the Bulge was evident all around. Dave helped other Mennonite men to restore livable conditions. The symbol of the MCC on the door panels of the trucks included the cross and the clasped hands of friendship. It was the Christian symbol of peace, replacing the sword of force that had reduced the countryside to ashes. Back home, tons of used clothing were donated and baled. Truckloads of meat, apples, and tomatoes were canned, and packages assembled to be given to families who had lost everything. For children, those packages were bundles of joy. Helping in this sharing was Blooming Glen's Irene Bishop. Irene became known in refugee communities across Germany, France, and Austria.
I enjoyed it very much. I always say they were the best years of my life. One of the places that I went to, the teacher tried to explain to her children who it was that was making these gifts possible and all about the Mennonite Church and the Mennonite Central Committee. And that evening when one of the children went home, the child said to its mother, "We had a visitor in school today." And the mother said, "Well, who came to visit you?" "The daughter of Jesus was there." And of course when I heard that, that was a very, very sobering thought for me.
Then in the 1950s, another wave of volunteers took ship for Europe. Their symbol was the word Pax, Latin for peace. Bells had been silenced by the horror of war. Though it had ended a decade earlier, much of the landscape still spelled disaster. Now, Pax boys from Souderton and Spring City and Deep Run and Line Lexington came bringing the love of Christ. Some skills had to be learned on the job, under demanding German foremen. Skills were learned that could be taken home. As fast as homes could be built, refugee families gratefully moved in. The boys dug foundations, made concrete blocks, raised walls and roofs, built a church. There was time for fun and worship and socializing. For Arlen Huntsberger of the Line Lexington congregation, it was the beginning of an unforeseen life of international service. From Germany, he was sent by MCC to Greece, and later spent 30 years in service in Haiti.
I just turned 20 the time I entered the PAX program. I initially was sent to Backnang, Germany, and then I was transferred to Greece after 6 months and spent 2 years in northern Greece. I can't imagine a Christian church being other than supportive of pacifism, of non-resistance, and of justice. Now, I'm not being judgmental by saying that those who don't, but as far as I'm concerned, that's very much at the heart of Christian teaching and at Christ's message. And as I've seen it in the world, I think more than ever, we should be teaching peace and justice.
Arlen has always treasured the homemade symbol given him by people in Greece, where he served as a Pax boy. When the Korean War renewed the military draft, a new governmental program called 1W, or Alternate Service, was set up. It lasted for over 20 years, through the war in Vietnam. Once again, draftees were allowed to serve in hospitals, such as one at Brattleboro, Vermont. Russell and Esther Musselman served there as chaplains to a little congregation of volunteers. They, like their ancestors in the Revolutionary War times, wanted to be soldiers of compassion instead of violence. In the kingdom of peace, the sword is loving service. The cross is a weapon of peace, and the bundle a symbol of love. From 1776 to 1966 to 2006, the testimony has been the same.
We are